Hey,
Holy Father.
welcome to our fourth class on Exodus. We're going to do chapter 4. This is the book from which I draw the outline of the line by line, and I add my own little 2 cents. And usually you can tell, oh, there's some more on the table over here. You usually can tell from the personality, but when I'm talking and when Dennis Prager is talking, but the thing I want to get across to you is that, remember, I have no original ideas. And a good teacher is not there to tell you how clever he is, but to share with you the best of what's out there. So, don't, sometimes people said, oh, well, unless this is an original, completely new interpretation, I'm not going to bother with it. Well, if it's original, complete, new, we've been working on it for 3,000 years, I don't think it's going to be that good. But Exodus 4. Before we start, let me have a few little announcements. On the back of your, if you've been to church already today, you'll have heard this, but if not, on the back of the bulletins is an announcement about the status of Gail and Aaron, and who's who and what's what, and how do we do things. See, because some people ask the questions, oh, are they deacons, or are they this, or are they that? Gail's ordination to the diaconate was to have been on September 8th. It's been postponed. And the reason why it was postponed was because of bureaucratic screw-up. What does that mean? Well, the Diocesan Standing Committee has to approve everybody to be ordained. And they had their June meeting, and not everybody showed up, and they had a huge agenda of all the things they wanted to cover because they don't meet for July and August because of summer. And guess what? What letter does Gail's last name begin with? T. T. If she were Shirley Anderson, she would have been approved. It didn't get to her on the agenda. And they next meet on the 21st of September, which means everything's postponed. It has nothing to do with her fitness or anything like that. It's just, it was hot, the bishop was away, and so therefore, as soon as they could cut out, they cut out. Now, Erin is starting next month at seminary in Wisconsin. She's doing a combination residential and distance learning program. So she'll be up there for 3 weeks, down here for a month or 2. Basically, she'll spend a quarter of her time there and 3/4 of her time here. And she's assigned as our seminarian assistant. Gail and Aaron are both postulants. They're not deacons. Aaron will be a deacon after she finishes seminary in 2+ years. Gail will be a deacon probably in January, because that's when they ordain the next team, unless the bishop wants to do a special outing. What are they now? They're called postulants. Well, what do they do in the services? Because I'm a deacon as well as a priest, and I'm their official trainer, I can delegate to them the jobs a deacon does during a service as part of their apprenticeship or craft training. In this diocese, we work on, some dioceses you just go to school, you're ordained, and then you have to learn what to do. Here, we do everything through an apprentice system. So I show Gail, on 5 o'clock on Saturday nights, I show Aaron how to do the hand gestures. Here's how you set up the altar. In other words, I show her all the things a priest and a deacon does. For Gail, I have her do 2 things that the deacon does. She reads the gospel and gives the dismissal. Now, I would give that because I'm also deacon and there's no deacon serving at that service. But I can delegate Gail to do that. If any of our deacons are there, Gail cannot do that because the deacon has the right, according to our prayer book, to do that. But in their absence, I'm able to give that. And I've told Aaron and Gail, you can serve as deacons during the service, but you can't do it anywhere else without my being present, because then it doesn't work. So if you marry somebody or if you bury somebody, we're going to have to dig them up and I'm going to have to do it all over again because it doesn't count. So just so that you know, because it's embarrassing for Gail because some people may think she's a deacon and she's not, and they may wish her well, and it just sort of embarrasses the whole situation. So I wrote all this long thing out to explain that, because I think it's best that we not have misunderstanding on this point. Yeah, make the assumption and all that. So that's that. And that's out of the way. Now we're going to talk about free will in Exodus 4. Isn't it great? All the fun stuff murder and lying, when you can murder, when you can lie. And now, last week we had the burning bush. When is God present in your life? When you look for him. He's always there. You just got to open your eyes and see him at work in this world. If you just close your eyes, you can walk past all the burning bushes in your life. I was driving on the Florida Turnpike on Friday, and I drove past so many accidents, and some of them could have been burning bushes, but I didn't stop and take a look. But today, we're going to talk about the author of the outline, Dennis Prager, has a longer section, which I'm sort of going to skip because he wants to talk about the difference between faith in God and belief in God. And that's an important issue, but it really doesn't get me up at night in excitement. There's another section here that I want to go a little deeper in, and that is free will. God hardened Pharaoh's heart against the Israelites. Does that mean that Pharaoh was a puppet and had no free will? Does that mean I can't help myself? I had to hold up that liquor store because I needed a fix. And I didn't mean to shoot that guy. I'm not responsible because I don't have the free will because of the drugs or the booze, or God made me do this. No. We're going to talk, well, hopefully we'll get into free will and all that. But let's start with Exodus 4. We've just had the burning bush and Moses' objections. And now Moses, at the beginning of chapter 4, God has called out Moses. This is what you're going to do. And Moses has all the reasons why he's not. And now, verse 4, we start with objection number 3. But Moses spoke up and said, what if they did not believe me and did not listen to me, but say the Lord did not appear to you? What if the Jewish people basically say, Moses, you're a kook? Moses has raised a third objection. His first objection, that he did not consider himself a shepherd of Midian worth it. He's a nobody. He's an Okie from Okeechobee or whatever. Well, should listen to him. They objected that he did not know God's right name. How am I supposed to say God sent me when I don't even know what your true name is? That's where we had I am sent me, and we had the little grammar lesson. Hebrew was like Russian and some other languages that don't have the word to be. It's not just cartoon cat creatures that say, I, Boris, you, Natasha. They just don't, that's how it sounds in Russian. They don't have I am, you are. They don't have that in Russian or Hebrew or some other languages. Moses' third objection presents a more serious challenge. God will now give Moses a demonstration of how he will prove to the doubters in Egypt both his presence and power. The Lord said to him, what's in your hand? And he replied, a rod or a staff. Before converting Moses' rod into a staff, God has Moses confirm it's an ordinary rod. In other words, this is sort of a setup line. What do you got in your hand? It's my shepherd's stick that I use to beat off the wolves, pull sheep out of holes. It's, part of my tools. Nothing special here, no magic. The Lord said, cast it on the ground. And he cast it on the ground, and it became a snake. And Moses recoiled from it. Then the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and grasp it by the tail. He put his hand and seized it, and became a rod in his hand. Let's just pause for a minute. Moses is good at his job. He's a good shepherd. He knows how to do his job. He knows animals. What's the last thing you do if you've got a wild snake?
Don't grab it.
By the what? You don't bite it by the tail. Why? Because it reaches around to bite you. So God is directing Moses. Any woodsy craftsman knows if you're going to grab a snake, you grab it right in back of the jaws to hold it. And then you can, we all I watch these nature shows. What's that Steve Irwin guy? He's always wrestling snakes and crocodiles and alligators. He doesn't grab them by the tail. He grabs them up here and then grabs the tail. But the Lord is saying, grab it by the tail. In asking to grasp the snake by his tail, God's testing Moses' faith. As a shepherd knows how to hold a snake, he's taking a risk and obeying God's command. Verse 4.5, that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, and the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob did appear to you. The Lord said to him further, put your hand into your bosom. He put it into his bosom, and when he took it out, his hand was encrusted with snowy scales. Throughout history, snowy scales has been translated into leprosy. That's what we understand. Or as modern science calls it, Hansen's disease. Now, does anybody know what leprosy really is? We've heard stories of leprosy. Yes, Bob?
Isn't it a virus?
Yes, it's a virus. And sometimes it's infectious, sometimes it's not. But it works by deadening the nerve cells and causing the skin and tissue in that deadened area to become necrotic. So it's especially bad on the extremities, fingers and feet and toes and faces, because if you get leprosy and you get it's like being a diabetic with a foot ulcer. You don't know it's there. And because you don't know it's there, it becomes necrotic and your toes fall off. Or if you scratch yourself and your nose falls off. It's a disfiguring disease that in the olden days people didn't know how it came from. It's treatable today and it's not fatal. I mean, it's like smallpox. It's a disease that's almost eradicated. But at that time, leprosy was a death sentence. And throughout history, skin disease has been translated as epithelial. Though we know not what, while it's an inflection of the skin, it's not leprosy in Moses' case. The comparison to snow is not about its whiteness, but its flakiness. Okay, he's got psoriasis. Rabbi Jacob Sarner notes, apart from the startling phenomenon of the sudden appearance, and in the next verse, disappearance of the incrustation, this particular sign had an ominous aspect to it. It is seen in the Bible as divine punishment for human behavior. Numbers 12:10 describes Moses' sister Miriam being afflicted with this punishment. And in 2 Chronicles, the king Uzziah is similarly punished with this skin disease, for the Lord had struck with a plague. It is likely that God performs this miracle to warn Moses that he's starting to tire of all its objections and to subtly remind him that he has the power to punish those who do not obey him. So 4:7, and he said, put your hand back into your bosom. And he put his hand back into the bosom, and when he took it out, there was again like the rest of his body. So God has transformed his ordinary work tool. It's like a carpenter's hammer or a seamstress's needles or something that you use in your everyday life is being turned into an instrument of God's glory and power, the shepherd's rod. It's turned into a snake. Moses still doesn't get it, and God basically wants to say, hey, who do you think? Hey, we're not fooling around. Stick your hand in, pull it out, stick it back in, pull it out. Oh, you're fine. I can do that. I'm God. God's power is being demonstrated. And so the hand, and God says, if they do not believe you, or if they heed you the first signs, they'll not believe the second. And if they are not convinced by these signs, and still do not heed you, take some water from the Nile, pour it on the dry ground, and the water that you take from the Nile will turn to blood on the dry ground. Unlike the first two signs, this one cannot be performed before Moses' eyes, because he's standing in the desert, rather than on the Nile. So again, this is a promise of faith. This is a test of Moses' faith. God is saying, if they don't do this, if they don't believe this, they don't believe that, try the blood water test. But since you're in the desert, and the Nile's not here, you got to trust me on this one. Just as you have to trust me on the fact that I am telling you to do this. But Moses said to the Lord, please, O Lord, I've never been a man of words, either in times past or now that you have spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue. Moses is, he does not have the gift of gab. He's not an Irishman. He's not going to be able to smell snow to Eskimos. Literally, and how's he going to sell God to the Jews? Now, look at it so far. When has Moses been successful? Moses is a man of quiet action. He's sort of John Wayne. He doesn't have a lot of lines. He smites the taskmaster. He stands up for the shepherdesses from the end of Midian. But when he tries to convince the two Jews who are fighting not to kill each other, what happens? They don't listen to him. So Moses is not a good Jewish lawyer. He's a man of action. And the Lord says to him, who gives men speech? Who makes him dumb or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? No, God's not really impressed with Moses' objections that he's a stumble top. And the Bible then continues, now go. Now, the Hebrew there is in the imperative sense, which, if you want to translate it, more means get going, move it, hop it. In other words, not a polite, usher saying, ladies and gentlemen, you may now exit the studio or audience. Not saying that. They go, come on, move. Hebrews direct. And I will be with you as you speak, and will instruct you what to say. See, Moses is chosen not because he is the most talented man out there. He's not the best speaker. He doesn't have the charisma of a salesman. He is the man chosen by God for his moral strength. Not because he sounds good, but because he is good. Now, don't we make that mistake in life? That we look at the package, we look at the wrapping, not at the person, the product. How many times have you been led astray in your life by being somebody? I just bought a car for my daughter, so I know what I'm talking about. How do you know? Used car, but still more than money than I wanted to spend. How easily, I'll talk about myself, how easily I'm persuaded by slick people who are nice, and I want to be nice, and I want to be liked, and I want to be agreeable, and I don't want to seem stupid. And how often do we make the mistake of trusting in the exterior than the interior?
My first husband.
Your first husband? Would you like to develop that?
He was a salesman. And he sold me a bill of goods for 24 years.
No returns or exchanges allowed?
No, that was the thing about it, No guarantees at all. No, he was like that, and he learned early on that in order to get where he wanted to go, he was handicapped. And so he felt like to get where he wanted to go, he needed to be the charismatic, the mover, the shaker, the help you, and he really was. I mean, he had a sales rep that wouldn't wait. And
One.
good,
I think, because I had one for 26, did the same thing.
Okay, yeah, go forward, Bob. How's that?
When I was a young priest, one of the mistakes I made, well, among many, was that people would come up to me and say, oh, I'll do this. I'll take care of this. I know how to fix this. And in other words, I would take people at face value upon their own. Have you ever met somebody who walks up, sells you a big thing, shows up once, and you never see him again? So one of the things I learned in building teams in the church is that welcome everybody, but don't make any real hard decisions until meeting 3, meeting 4, meeting 5. Because the people who talk a good game don't always deliver. And so what God is saying here to Moses is, look, Moses, I have chosen you because of your heart, because of who you are as a person, not because of the worldly skills that you've been given. Yes, you have some attributes that make you unique. You can move into Pharaoh's court and talk, and they'll listen because you're one of them. You're a Jew as well. In other words, there's some things that are unique to yourself. But I am choosing you because of you, not because of the package. Right.
I like the next one.
But he said, please, O Lord, make someone else your agent. After 4 carefully reasoned objections, Moses finally admits the truth. He doesn't want to do this. It's a dangerous, arduous, all-consuming mission. He's got a pretty wife. He's got a good job. He's the boss's son-in-law. It's going to have the business one day. Why screw this up and possibly get killed? He's a wanted man in Egypt. The fifth objection is a final desperate plea. In this sense, Moses is an ideal leader because he doesn't really want the job. Throughout history, most national leaders ache to be powerful, influential, famous, and rich. Moses either preferred to lead a life as a simple man with his family, or he feared returning to Egypt for both. Sometimes, you want somebody to want a job if you're hiring them, but by the same token, you have to ask yourself, do they want this job for what they can get out of it? In other words, and when you look at politicians, there are some politicians that now I'm not going to, well, this is bad, but I sort of like the fact that the president doesn't need the money. Like he couldn't care less how much you paid him because, he's so rich he can't be bribed. Now, let's not talk about how he got so rich and his personality. Nothing about that. But one aspect of his personality I find attractive because a lot of other people are in hock to this, to lobbyists and special interests. Will give you this much money for your campaign if you support the farm bill, if you do this or that. And of course, when we've got a system like that, it's never going to get totally fixed because everybody owes somebody something else. But when you have somebody who doesn't owe anybody anything, that's sort of I find that attractive, but I don't want to get into politics. So let's get back into the Bible. And the Lord became angry with Moses. He said, "There's your brother Aaron the Levite. He, I know, speaks readily. Even now he's setting out to meet you." Now let's pause for a second.
Do you think he was angry or frustrated?
Okay, says angry. And
I'm just wondering what the word was.
annoyed. Frustrated would imply that God feels powerless in the face of Moses' objections.
Oh, no, he could do it.
Oh, yeah, and so he's just more annoyed. Moses, damn it, do it. It goes back to, now go. Remember we had the little thing in chapter 1 of Moses has kept touch with his family. How does he know he has a brother Aaron? How they keep, how, it's sort of like, it's like one of these, oh, my long-lost brother is now looking for me. How do you know, how's he looking for you? How does he know that you're long-lost, all this and that? So we must know that Moses, who was raised by his biological mother, but reared in the household of the Egyptian princess, Pharaoh's daughter, had links with his family, because he knew Aaron was his brother. And they were close enough that Aaron, that they were aware of each other's, location and everything. Right, I have brothers in Pensacola and down in Boca Raton. I don't know what they're doing right now, but I know where they are if I need to find them. Finally, so God loses patience and he does offer him a consolation. Moses will not be alone. He's got his brother Aaron to help speak. And later, we see that Aaron is the one who does the public speaking. And that's good and bad, because when we get into the golden calf, it's Aaron who basically, because Moses isn't there, Aaron gets sort of manipulated into doing the wrong stuff. And he'll be happy to see you, Aaron will. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with you and with him as you speak, and tell both of you what to do. And he shall speak for you to the people. Thus he shall serve as your spokesman, with you playing the role of God to him. And take with you this rod, which you shall perform the signs. The rod will accompany Moses for the rest of his life, serving as a link to his first encounter with God at the burning bush and a reminder of his humble origins of a shepherd. Moses will remain a shepherd through his new flock, though his new flock will be the Jewish people. That Moses wages battles with the Egyptian using a simple shepherd's rod rather than sophisticated weaponry is reminiscent of the sling and the 5 smooth stones which the young shepherd David confronted and prevailed over the Philistine giant Goliath. With God on their side, Moses and David overcome foes more mighty than the Israelites on whose behalf they fought. Moses is going to overturn the Egyptian world with his brother and a stick. Just think about that. That doesn't make any sense unless God is behind it. The story of David and Goliath. David has all these big brothers. David, you know, is the weakest, the smallest, the tiniest. In fact, he's not even old enough to go up to the front. He brings his little shepherd's slingshot, which he uses to scare off wolves. And with that, he slays the giant Goliath, when the other warriors of Israel haven't been able to achieve anything. I think the point that we're driving home, it's a point we hear again and again in the New Testament as well, is that God uses unlikely things to achieve his will. I was brought to a saving faith in Jesus Christ by a legless black man in an inner city hospital in Philadelphia who died the next day. This guy, from an economic point of view, was a waste of society's resources. He provided nothing. He cost money, cost the state of Pennsylvania money. He was taking up bed space. He had no family, no friends. Yet my interaction with him led me to an understanding of Christ's forgiveness and life. No, he was an old black guy. He wasn't an angel. He was an old black guy. But God used him. Just as God can use each and every one of us in circumstances where we may think, how in the world could we do this? So, despise not the small things in life. It's one of the things that Jules said about the burning bush. God did not give them a giant cedar tree that everybody could see, that's the envy of the world. He gave them one of these scrubby little plants by the side of the highway that the mower men cut down. That's the power that God uses. So Moses went back to his father-in-law and said to him, let me go back to my kinsmen in Egypt and see how they're doing. Now, why is Moses asking his father-in-law? Well, it could be because he's sort of letting his father-in-law know that he's taken his daughter back to Egypt. And it's probably good politics to let her know that I'm taking you from hearth and home and basically putting your daughter's life in danger. And the other was that he's basically showing good manners. The third could be that Jethro and Moses were very close. I mean, this was a good relationship and he wanted to talk to somebody. But what does he not say? He doesn't tell his father-in-law, God told me to do this. So what are we hearing in the background here? God has spoken to Moses, he's given him a command. Moses is sort of clearing it with his father-in-law, his boss, his wife's father, but he doesn't tell him the whole story. Do you think there's a little bit of doubt still in Moses' mind? If you went to your father-in-law and said, oh, God has told me to do something and take your little baby daughter with me. God has told me to move to Haiti and serve among the Haitians and live amongst the poor. And if I said that to my father-in-law 25 years ago, he said, oh, fine, go off. Susan will wait here for you.
I'll let her visit every so often.
And Jethro said to God, Moses, go in peace. Jethro understood the importance of tribe. So in other words, Moses makes the argument, I need to go see my people, and that's persuasive to Jethro. He doesn't tell him, I need to obey God, which may or may not work. The Lord said to Moses and Midian, go back to Egypt, for all the men who have sought to kill you are dead. And God knows our thoughts, and he understood that Moses was still afraid of being executed if he returned to Egypt. Therefore, God reassures him that he no longer has reason to fear for his life. If you ever watched the movie Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston, there are a few storyline gaps. If you're wanted for murder, and Sir Cedric Hardwicke, as Pharaoh, wants to kill you, how can you show up and have Yul Brynner, his son, your cousin, not immediately kill you? What happened? I mean, did the king sign a pardon or something? In this story, we've got, in essence, a new Pharaoh, new leaders. Everybody's forgotten about Moses. Time has passed by. So Moses took his wife and his sons, mounted them on an ass, and went back to the land of Egypt, and Moses took the rod of God with him.
Walk quietly and carry under the stick.
Yes, and put your children on an ass with the station wagon. Now, notice that we have plural sons. So Moses and Zipporah have not been idle, they've been popping out babies, life goes on. And the Lord said to Moses, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the marvels that I put within your power. I, however, will stiffen his heart that he will not let the people go. This is one of the things I wanted to get a little more into. The Torah refers 20 times to the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. Half of them are attributed to Pharaoh's decision to harden his heart, and half of them are attributed to God's hardening Pharaoh's heart. The latter instances have troubled readers throughout the ages. Is it fair to punish someone, in this case Pharaoh, who is not acting freely because God has hardened his heart? In other words, 20 times we hear about Pharaoh and this. 10 times he's made up his mind, this is what he's going to do. And 10 times God has hardened Pharaoh's heart. And the question arises, are we being fair to Pharaoh if God made him do it? It's a question of free will. In other words, now we need to distinguish between someone who is genuinely mentally ill, who has no control over their abilities, someone who's a raging schizophrenic and voices are in his head are telling him to kill, and we're not talking about that situation, because Moses is not crazy. We know that. Or Pharaoh is not crazy. Yet God is predisposing Pharaoh to be tough with the Israelites. Is that fair? In other words, is God being mean? In other words, is God making Pharaoh the bad guy? What do you all think of that? Does that bother anybody? Yul Brynner does look scary. So, I mean, he's a good villain, but...
hardening their hearts is not equivalent to preventing them from making a decision. It may be hard, and we have things that may be hard for us to do, but we still have the choice, a God-given choice.
I remember when Susan was at law school. Yes, years and years ago. Susan was a lawyer, and she'd tell me all the exciting things that she learned that day in class. Because I was an attentive husband, and I would listen at the dinner table. Ooh, law against perpetuities. Ooh, fascinating. But when she did criminal law, that was interesting. And one of the things I found fascinating was, if you're drunk or high, and you hold up a liquor store and kill somebody, at that time, you can't really, you're doing what you're doing, but are you responsible legally? And the answer is yes. Because you drank, because you made the choice to drink, because you made the choice to shoot heroin, the consequences of that, if you get drunk and decide to get in your car and go driving, the consequences are you may get home okay, or you may kill somebody. Yes.
But it's true, it's sentencing that the judge, it doesn't seem fair to me, but it's more lenient if they're drunk or high.
Well, that's Pennsylvania, and they're all crooked judges. They're all in the pockets of the liquor lobby. No, but I mean, you know, in law, being under the influence is not an excuse. It's not a deterring factor. You know, have you ever, well, I'll talk about myself. I've been so angry at something, then something else unrelated happens, and I overreact. Now, I've never killed anybody, but, you know, I've more than once yelled at my children for something that is so minor and inconsequential because I was mad about something else.
Oh, yeah, we all know that.
Has that ever happened to you, Bobby?
Oh,
Never.
it's not okay to lie in this case, you're always gonna die, but yes, I have done that.
Dottie.
To get back to Pharaoh here, and was God being unfair, I think we have to look at this from the long range maybe. The Jews have been down now in Egypt for 400 years roughly, and they went down there as a small group and then multiplied and become a large group. And because they've become so large, the Egyptians are afraid that they could rise up against them, and so now they're going to take away all their boy babies, and they have enslaved them to such a point that they are nothing but ants, if you will. I mean, they can be killed at will. And Pharaoh had that power. You know, that's one of the things I have learned in the last few years studying history. Kings in those days had total power. You had no recourse, not like we do in our country today. If they said die, you died, you know. And so we have to remember that. So now God, these are God's chosen people there, and He is going to rescue them and bring them out of this pit that they are in. And so He is using Pharaoh to accomplish His purposes so that His name can be glorified by the miracles that He's doing. And so, is it fair to Pharaoh? I think so. Maybe not, I don't know. But you have to again think that Pharaoh had total power and could do whatever he wanted. And so God is using him to show Pharaoh that you don't have total power. I have total power. So that's another way to look at that scene, I think.
I think you're right. I want to pull back a bit and just give a little anecdote, then pull into what Prager says. I want to sort of end a little anecdote. When I was in college, I never really drank that much. I didn't like it. I never enjoyed getting drunk, but I was in a fraternity where, what did you do on Friday night? You got drunk. So I wound up as the fraternity bail bondsman.
Love that.
Married to an attorney?
No, I mean, in other words, if somebody got pulled over for drunk driving, I would be the one who would go over with $200 or $300 to bail them out. And some of the counties around us were dry counties, so they were more expensive. But my roommate, Joe, we had a party at some lodge or whatever, and it was a Hawaiian-themed party, and Joe, bless his heart, went wearing a grass skirt and 2 coconuts like this, and his underpants and a pair of shoes, and he got pulled over for drunk driving. And I got the call, and I went over, and I was soberly, properly dressed, and Joe was in the drunk tank, and I think at those days in North Carolina, I think they were very lenient with young white boys who were basically stupid. And Joe was going to go be a doctor. He was going to go on to medical school. And so Joe's fear was that if he had a conviction, he couldn't go on to medical school. This would basically destroy his life. And I remember the sheriff's deputy at the desk saying, son, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. If you're going to get drunk, this may happen. It's not going to happen every time. But, you know. And actually, because Joe's father was wealthy, they had an attorney, and the charges were suspended for 18 months, and if he didn't get arrested again, they were quashed, so it never appeared on his record. But I think what the sheriff's deputy said really struck me. If you can't do the time, don't do the crime. If you're going to take drugs, if you're going to drink, and you're going to put yourself in a situation where you may do a crime, it's your own damn fault. Now, is this the situation with Pharaoh? And it's actually yes. Pharaoh is choosing. And Prager has 2 things. God believed Pharaoh deserved to be punished. Had Pharaoh released the Israelites after a single plague, God would have not been able to adequately punish him and the Egyptian nation for enslaving the Israelites for hundreds of years. This is Dottie's point. I mean, justice, would not be served by one little shock to Pharaoh. Okay, guys, you can go now. Because we're talking about hundreds of years of enslavement, the murder of infant boys. These are the things Dottie raised. All of these things they did out of their own free will. Pharaoh chose to kill all the Hebrew children because he was fearful of an uprising. This is Dottie's point. Part 2 is strengthening Pharaoh's heart is precisely what gave Pharaoh free will. I have to think about that. What does that mean? Had God not strengthened Pharaoh's heart, Pharaoh would have released the Israelites after 1 or at least 2 or 3 plagues. But such a release would have been no more an act of free will than it's free will when a man gives confession while being tortured, or signs a contract with a gun pointed at his head. I'll make an offer you can't refuse. Marlon Brando says that. God's strengthening allowed Pharaoh to do what in his heart he really wanted to do. In other words, the strengthening was not the directing of Pharaoh's heart. It was giving Pharaoh the strength to stand on his own convictions and beliefs. If Pharaoh's heart was strengthened, and he really wanted to do mercy, he would do mercy come hell or high water. But Pharaoh, he wanted to punish these damn Jews. And he wouldn't let a few plagues or a few things. So Pharaoh's, by strengthening his heart, it was actually giving Pharaoh the internal strength to stand upon what Pharaoh believed. So in this sense, God is not manipulating Pharaoh or changing what Pharaoh would do, but rather, according to Prager's argument, that the hardening of heart did not deprive the king of his free will, it strengthened it. I think that's a clever argument. I've never really thought about it, and I frankly don't worry about it that much, because I'm sort of inclined to Dottie's argument, the just reward for the evil done to the Jews by the Egyptians. But I think it's an interesting point. Let me jump forward. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord of Israel is my firstborn son. I have said to you, let my son go, that he may worship me, yet you refuse to let him go. Now here Prager has a longish essay on the difference between belief in God and faith in God. Now, I think this is interesting academically. I'll put it that way. Let me just summarize this quickly. Few readers, even veteran students of the Bible, recall the killing of Moses, Pharaoh's firstborn son, which transpired during the 10th plague. It was mentioned by God to Moses even before the plagues began. But Moses does not repeat those words to Pharaoh at this point. Perhaps he feared it would provoke Pharaoh to kill him. It is indeed the reason Moses does not fulfill this explicit order from God, but would reveal it that at this point he lacked complete faith in God, that God would protect him. He would come to faith later, but at this point both God and his promises were quite new to Moses. In a sense, then one could even say that God has to establish credibility to be fully trusted, which raises the issue of trust or faith in God. There are two distinct meanings. I believe in God, and the second is I believe God exists. And the first meaning is I believe God exists. The second meaning is I trust in God. The first is the most common meaning. I believe God exists. I don't understand. I don't know how. And God may be for me or against me, but there's somebody out there ordering the world and the universe. That's one way. The second way is I trust in God. And I think as Christians, the difference between Christians and deists and Christians and most people is that we trust. We're supposed to trust in Jesus Christ. We're supposed to trust in God. Lots of people believe in God. There's sort of what I call the atheists in the foxhole. They start believing in God once the shells come down. Once they get cancer, they start praying up a storm. Because they believe there's somebody out there. But trusting in God is a little different. Trusting in God, I'll let you read this on your own speed, but I'll understand it and I'll interpret it. You trust in God even when life is not going your way. In other words, I've shared with you I was a hospice priest for many years. Jack Holman died this week. He died on Wednesday. I was able to see him. I gave him last rites and heard him did confession. I also saw him previously when I was still able to speak. And Jack trusted in God. And his final hope, and he talked about this extensively also with Mike and Linda, was that if he had any regrets, he was not able to get his daughters to a level of faith and belief that he had. He looked back in his life, he wished he had spent more time telling them about Jesus. Jack knew he was going to die. Jack's in hospice. He's going to die. The pain is under control, but it's still there. But he still trusted in God. Now, what does that mean when you're about to die? Does it mean, in other words, I believe God's out there. He may care, he may not care. But I trust in God that I'm going to pass through this experience, and I'm going to be with him in paradise. And all will be well, and all will be well. even though my body is being racked by pain and cancer, I still trust in you. Even though my children have gone astray, or even though my wife has left me, or even, none of this is true. Even though my children have gone astray, my wife has left me, I've lost my job, I can still trust in God. Doesn't mean my wife will come back, my children will be good, and I get my job back. But I still trust that God is there for me. You see the distinction that Prager is trying to make? Does that make sense to you all? As I say, for me, it's more of an academic thing because I personally have never really doubted the existence of God. It's never really been an issue for me, but for some people it is. But so, at the night encampment, okay, here's an exciting part. It's too bad Bella's not here because she could go early. We're going to talk about circumcision. At a night encampment, along the way, the Lord encountered him and sought to kill him. What? Wait. I thought God has just been trying to twist Moses' arm, giving him 4 good reasons why he should save the Hebrew people, and he sets back to Egypt in the station wagon with his kids and the wife, and God tries to kill him? What's this all about? Well, it introduces the story of circumcision. And I'll want to read this because it helps explain it. Because to be perfectly frank, until I reread this the other day, I had forgotten completely about this. In an age when the rite of circumcision is under attack in some circles, this episode reminds us of how seriously God takes one specific commandment. Iceland just passed a law forbidding the circumcision of boys. I'm circumcised, and in my generation, I guess in Pennsylvania, every boy, unless you were some hippy-dippy type, every boy was circumcised. And it's not because we were all Jews, it's just the doctors did it for hygiene purposes. I have 3 nephews. 2 of them were circumcised. They grew up born in Florida. And then we have my nephew who lives up in Pensacola, whose mother's a bit of a hippy-dippy, into alternative natural medicine and everything. And I had my brothers and I talked to my other brother and said, look, Carter, my brother, Christopher's going to go to school one day and take showers in front of other boys, and if he's not circumcised, his life is going to be hell. You don't want to be different in that sense. And even though his wife, Maria, said, oh, circumcision's child abuse, they still circumcised. Not for any Jewish religious purposes, but in America, everybody's circumcised, or at least, I assume so, boys. But God has a religious, did you really want to hear that? Well, you did anyway. Now, Rabbi Sarna maintains that the obscure, and in Europe though, they don't, only Jews and Muslims are circumcised. And in Iceland, they, with their maybe 3 Jews and 2 Muslims, they've gone out of their way to say that if you're a Jew or a Muslim and you want your child circumcised, you got to go back to wherever you came from because you can't do it here because we view this as child abuse. Rabbi Sarna maintains that this obscure incident documented in this verse and the 2 following it are probably a truncated version of a larger popular story. The story is missing several important details. Most notably, we cannot be certain whom God sought to kill or why. Umberto Cassuto, an Italian Jewish scholar, argues it was Moses, not the son, that God sought to kill, perhaps as punishment for failing to circumcise his son. In either case, Zipporah understood that circumcising their son was necessary, and Moses' life, or his son's life, is saved again by a woman. Remember that strange little oddity about the Jewish people, how important women are? How women make the difference when it really comes down to it? God has, so the traditional Jewish understanding, which Christians follow, is that God has commissioned Moses, he's all set to go, but on the way, Moses has to be reminded, you still have to do the important things that you're supposed to be doing anyway, even if you weren't commissioned to save my people. And one of them is circumcise your son. So, verse 425, I neglected to highlight it. So Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskins, touched his legs with it, saying, you are truly a bridegroom of blood to me. The The story underscores the centrality of circumcision to Jewish identity. Thousands of years after this event, the philosopher Spinoza, a Jew who was excommunicated from the Jewish community because of his free thinking, mentioned that as long as Jews practice circumcision, they will survive as a distinct people. Circumcision, even for non-practicing religious Jews, is a mandatory. You can. When I was in Israel, on a Friday night, which is the Passover, I was hungry at 1 a.m. and I could find a pizza parlor, and I got a slice of pepperoni pizza, which was a triple sin. Because I was in Jerusalem. I found a pizza parlor open on the Sabbath, which everything should be closed. And I had meat with my cheese, which is a sin, and I had a pork product, which is a triple sin. I could still get a slice of pepperoni pizza in Jerusalem in the Jewish district. But if I tried to go around and take everybody's pants off and find somebody who wasn't circumcised, it wasn't going to happen. I'd be seeing the inside of an Israeli prison. But the point is, they will slide, and they'll let non-religious Jews get away with some stuff. But just like the culture of boys and showers in high school, there's some stuff that you're just not going to be different about. So circumcision, but that's from a religious perspective. That's one of the marks of Judaism rather than cultural. So, and circumcision was widely practiced among the ancient Semites, and in Egypt, the Torah, and in Egypt. Now, unfortunately, in those cultures, they do double circumcision. They circumcise women. The Jews have never circumcised women. And we call this in the West female genital mutilation. One of the things that the church in Egypt and especially in East Africa, where they've had contact with Muslims, the church has been at the forefront of trying to make female genital mutilation illegal. Because why are women circumcised? To remove I'm going to be gross here, but to remove I believe it's called the labia, so that there's no physical sensation. And excuse me?
The clitoris.
Clitoris, excuse me. Removing that, in essence, so that the sexual activities are limited and refined and controlled by the family or by the husband. It's a form of submission, if you will, to higher order. It's nothing to do with religion. It's just part of their tribal customs. And one of the fights the Christian churches in Kenya and Uganda and the Sudan and in the Arab countries is saying is that this is tribal. It has nothing to do with God. And up in places like Detroit, where they've got a biggish Muslim minority, and in England, where they have immigrants from Pakistan, they have a real problem of gynecologists, Muslim gynecologists, practicing this. Now, they don't do it like the peasants do, but still, this is a live issue. And so this circumcision was out there, but for the Torah, elevated it to a new meaning. Just for men, though, not for girls. The fact circumcision was practiced in other cultures demonstrates the important part of the significance of the ritual, not the ritual itself that matters. Anti-religious writers often cite religious rituals and holy days that were also practiced by pagans in order to denigrate those rituals and holy days and by extension religion. But what higher religion does is use these familiar rituals, practices, and themes and infuses them with moral and elevated spiritual meaning. When St. Augustine of Canterbury went to England to re-Christianize Britain, one of the things he did was that whenever he went into a town or village, he would take the local pagan temple and he built a church on it. Not because it was the best piece of real estate in town, but rather to take the people's traditional yearning for God and focus it on the true God, Jesus Christ. When the missionaries went out to Africa, the successful missionaries were the ones who would say to the Africans, there's a glimpse, you've got something, your traditional beliefs and understanding, you're looking through the glass darkly. You get a tiny bit of it, but let me give you the clear picture. They didn't go out and said, at one time they would go out and say, all this is evil and witchcraft and everything that you have from your culture is from Satan, therefore it's evil. When they did that for 200 years, it really didn't do much evangelization. But when they said, look, your instincts are right, but let's give you the real story, and you can really see how God's working in this world, so that your first harvest festival that you celebrate the local God or whatever is an imitation. It's a copy of the true thing. And why should you settle for the imitation when you can have the real thing?
Good sales technique.
Well, your husband would approve.
So that's kind of like what Paul did when he went to Athens and said, this God that you worship is an unknown God, let me tell you about him.
Exactly. And it ties into my sermon at 10:30, so I won't go any further. And when he left alone, she added, a bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision. It is unclear what this phrase, a bridegroom of blood, really means, even though Sephora is addressing, especially since shaitan, bridegroom, also means to protect in Arabic. Sarna contends Sephora is in effect telling their son, you are now circumcised, so protected for me by means of the blood of circumcision. Others hold she's talking to Moses, who is after all her bridegroom. So we don't know what that means. The Lord said to Aaron, go to meet Moses in the wilderness, and he went and met him at the mountain of God, and he kissed him. This is the same mountain of God that we were at earlier, Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai. So they'd suggest that they met at where the burning bush was, in chapter 3, verse 1. Moses told Aaron about all the things the Lord had committed to him and all the signs about which he had entrusted him. There are 3 signs: the rod into a snake, the healthy hand into a diseased hand, and the transformation of water into blood. Then Moses and Aaron went and assembled all the elders of the Israelites. Aaron repeated all the words that the Lord had spoken to Moses, and he performed the signs in the sight of the people. And the people were convinced. When they heard that the Lord had taken note of the Israelites and that he had seen their plight, they bowed low in homage. The people believed after they witnessed the signs. Today, such signs would likely to be dismissed by most people as magic tricks. This is not to say that God no longer directly communicates with human beings, only that in an age of science and skepticism, people are less likely to be persuaded by miracles than in the past. I'm going to pick on Kathy because Kathy worked for years in what I would call a non-scientific environment. The power of the miraculous, from what I remember in our conversation, is much more real in the Honduran church than it is in the American church. Is that a fair statement?
Certainly, they depend on God for everything. They even don't have medicines and everything that they can afford to buy for things, and so a lot of laying on hands and anointing and praying for people. A lot of healing goes on out of that faith. They start every planting season with a, I guess it's almost a pagan rite where you go out onto the fields and you bless the fields, but